Did you know that the median 401k balance for ages 65 to 74 in the United States is $200,000? But if you were to listen to popular media, you would think that you need over $2 million to retire comfortably. So, where is the disconnect? Why do they keep telling you need this much money to actually retire? In today's video, we're going to be pulling back the curtain on what a $200,000 or less retirement could actually look like. We'll be going through a 30-year case study of how this could look in practice, and I'll be giving you some practical tips on how you could retire comfortably on $200,000. Let's get into it. So where is this $2 million number coming from? They didn't just pull it out of thin air. It's coming from the old 4% rule. They're assuming that you have a $2 million retirement balance and you're withdrawing 4% a year. 4% a year on $2 million is about $80,000 of income. So income replacement is the name of the game. What you want to do is replace your income in retirement. And a lot of times your spending will actually be about the same when you retire and might go down slightly. So they want you to get 80 to 90% income replacement. But the problem with all this is that it's completely wrong. Retirement is not one single number that you have to live off for the rest of your life. It's actually two separate numbers, a bridge number and a gap number. So if you are retiring early, you need some account balance to bridge you from early retirement to when you start drawing Social Security. And if you are drawing Social Security, now your portfolio just needs to make up for any income gap after Social Security for the rest of your life. So it's actually two separate math problems, solving for a bridge and solving for a gap. But if you are retiring and you plan to start drawing Social Security right away, which is what we're going to be analyzing in today's video, you don't actually care about that bridge number. All you need to do is analyze for the income gap that you're going to be left with after you start drawing Social Security. So one thing that a lot of people don't recognize is that middle-class households rely on Social Security to replace up to 50% of their income in retirement. That's right, Social Security is up to 50% of people's income in retirement. And your portfolio only has to make up that other half or that other 40% or whatever is left after you start drawing Social Security. Now, one concern that I hear over and over again, especially from millennials and Gen Z, is that Social Security is not going to be there when I retire. And this logic is just plain wrong. So Social Security is actually being funded from two separate sources. Payroll taxes, which is almost a 12% tax on everyone who is generating income in the United States and reporting their taxes, and a subsidy fund to make up any difference in the actual demand from Social Security and what they collected from payroll taxes. So when people say Social Security is running out of money, they don't mean that the payroll taxes are going away. They're talking about that additional fund. And yes, that additional fund is being slowly depleted for a variety of reasons. The work demographics are shifting, the generations after the baby boomers are smaller. People are living longer and drawing this benefit for longer periods of times. So for a variety of reasons, the Social Security benefit is either going to have to go down slightly or they're going to have to collect more taxes to maintain it the same. But it's never actually going away. Social Security will always be there. They're always going to keep collecting those payroll taxes. So let's get into this case study of what a 200K retirement could actually look like. So there's a few assumptions going into this case study. So the first one is that we're assuming that you're retiring at age 67 in the year 1996. So at age 67, you're going to start withdrawing your Social Security, and we're going to analyze for 30 years from 1996 to 2026. So a solid 30-year retirement. That would make you 97 years old at the end of this retirement time frame, which is well beyond the average life expectancy in the United States. So Social Security, the way it works is that you could start drawing at age 62. That would be early. And for each year you delay from 62 to 67, your benefit is going up roughly 5 to 6.5% per year. And then if you wait from age 67 to age 70, each year that you wait, your benefit will go up about 8%. So the maximum possible Social Security benefit that you can get will be at age 70. The full benefit is at age 67, and drawing early is at age 62. For our case study, we're assuming that you're drawing Social Security at full retirement age of 67. The other thing is we're going to assume in our case study that you're married and that the combined Social Security benefit is $42,000. I think the $42,000 a year is a pretty reasonable assumption. The median Social Security benefit for a retiree in the United States right now is $1,750 a month. You account for both spouses, we're saying that's $3,500 a month, which gets us to our $42,000 estimate. So let's talk about the income that we actually have to make up for in retirement. So a household in their mid to late 60s, their average annual spending is between $60,000 to $84,000 a year. So for the purposes of our case study, we're going to assume that we only intend to spend about $60,000 a year. That puts you firmly in the middle class of households. And this is a pretty fair estimate. So if you look at current demographic numbers, people in this age bracket, they spend about $1,850 a month on housing. That's about $22,000 a year. On transportation, it's about $790 a month. That's about $9,500 a year. On food, they're spending about $660 a month. That's $7,900 a year. On healthcare, they're spending about $650 a month, which is about $7,800 a year. One thing worth noting on healthcare is that at age 65, everyone has to opt into Medicare, and the Medicare premiums that you have to pay are directly correlated to how much income that you are drawing in retirement. So at these lower income draws, at these lower income brackets in retirement, you don't face the IRMA surcharges and your Medicare costs are not that high. And then for entertainment and travel, it's about $250 a month. That's $3,000 a year. And then on all the other stuff, apparel, insurance, any other miscellaneous spending, that's about $800 a month. And we're saying that's $9,600 a year. So that is how that $60,000 spending estimate actually looks in practice. Then for our actual retirement account, we're going to assume that it's just in a 401k. You only have $200,000, and we're actually going to assume a withdrawal rate of 6%.
You sure about that?
6% sounds aggressive, but one key thing to note is that that 6% is going to go up and down based on the account balance. So if your account balance is above that 200,000, you're going to draw a little bit more. And if it's less than 200,000, you're going to draw a little bit less. And with the $60,000 in spending that we anticipate in retirement, with the $42,000 that we're going to get from Social Security, our portfolio needs to make up for about $18,000. So if we just had a flat $18,000 draw from our 200K nest egg, it's very different than having a flexible 6% withdrawal from our retirement accounts. That's just something worth noting, and we'll circle back to that later in this video. And for what we're actually invested in here, I did not do anything fancy. I just assumed that you're invested in the S&P 500 across this 30-year time frame. We didn't hedge risk with a 60-40 stock bond portfolio. We didn't do a bucket strategy with cash, bonds, and stocks. We didn't do any sort of withdrawal guardrails using risk-based guardrails or like cleaner or anything like that. We just assumed we're drawing 6% and we're 100% in the S&P 500. So discussing our withdrawal time frame. Starting in 1996 to 2026, there are some major market events that happen in that time frame. The first one is the dot-com bubble. The dot-com bubble hits you in the early 2000s of our retirement time frame. And just when you think the account balance is going to recover, you hit the global financial crisis in 2008, that housing bubble crash. So our sequence of returns across our retirement time frame are not the best. I did not cherry pick some optimal scenario for our retirement time frame. We're actually picking some of the most challenging times to actually retire. So here's the bad news. Withdrawing 6% a year on a 200K nest egg, you're going to have some income shortfalls. You're not going to be able to make up for that full income gap the entire 30-year time frame. So we actually found that 10 out of those 30 years, you were pretty lean. So 1996, when you first retired, 2002 through 2005, you were under your $18,000 target. 2008 through 2012, you were also below your income target. In 2008, you were actually the shortest. You're about $7,600 short of what you actually wanted to withdraw from your accounts. So this isn't exactly a comfortable retirement if 1/3 of the time you're falling short of what your desired portfolio income to make up for your income gap should be. But it's not as bad as it seems. So one thing worth noting is that your retirement spending across retirement is not actually linear. You're not going to be withdrawing a static $60,000 combined from Social Security and your portfolio. What people see in practice is a retirement smile. So you start high. When you first retire, your spending is pretty close to your pre-retirement levels, maybe even slightly higher. You're doing vacations, you're doing those things that you've been deferring to when you actually retired. And then as you go further into your retirement, your spending actually starts to dip. You become more sedentary, you go on less adventures, and you end up spending less money. And then late in life, you run into long-term care and health things, and your spending comes up again. This spending profile is called the retirement smile. It's pretty common to see that dip in the middle and then that rise at the end, and spending pretty close to what you were spending at beginning. And if you account for that, you realize that the lean years, which hit you in the middle of your retirement, line up pretty closely with what you would expect your actual retirement spending to do. And the other thing that you might flag in this analysis is, why would someone retire knowing that in the first year, their portfolio won't be able to make up for the income gap? And it's worth noting that 42 to 59% of retirees are actually forced out of the workforce. So it's not actually the craziest scenario that you might be forced out of the workforce at age 67 and your account may not exactly be where you want it to be. This scenario happens to more people than you realize, and it's one of the reasons people advocate for you saving money early. So if this hits and you're forced out of the workforce, you're not blindsided and you actually have a decent nest egg to accommodate. So the other question you might have is, well, what if we just ignore that 6% withdrawal rate? What if we just took out $18,000 a year every year regardless? We just didn't care about the 6% and we took the money out that we needed and said, who cares about this 6% rule? If you did that, your account actually runs out of money. It runs out of money 20 years into your retirement. So in 2016. So 20 years into your retirement, you'd be age 87. And if you actually looked at the average life expectancy in the United States right now, it's age 79. Women have a slightly higher life expectancy at 81.4, but age 79 is the average life expectancy now. So if you didn't run out of money until age 87, if you had an average life expectancy, this wasn't actually a problem for you. You could have withdrawn that 18K a year and you would have just been fine. You would have had some scary times. You might have been worried that you were running out of money and your account balance was getting lower, but you would have been just fine. You would have died before this ever became an issue. The other thing worth noting is that Social Security actually adjusts up with time. We did not take into account any of the cost of living adjustments that would naturally happen with Social Security. So every single year, Social Security actually adjusts up a little bit based on inflation. And on average, that adjustment is about 2.6%. That is what we've been seeing. And if inflation's a little higher, they adjust a little bit more. And if inflation's a little bit lower, then they'll either make no adjustments or smaller adjustments. So we didn't account for these cost of living adjustments that you'd be getting from Social Security across our retirement time frame. So the actual income gap that your portfolio needs to make up for is actually shrinking across this 30-year time frame. The other thing that we didn't really account for in this analysis is that many retirees, when their account balance starts to go down, they cut back on how much they're spending. In fact, 39% of retirees end up spending far less in retirement than they actually can, regardless if the market is up or if the market is down. They want to see their account balance grow and not staying the same or slightly drawing down in retirement. So about 40% of retirees end up spending far less than they can actually spend comfortably. And the last thing worth noting is housing is the biggest expense in retirement. And currently, 74 to 80% of adults that are 65 or older own their home. That wipes out the majority of their largest expense. Now, demographics are shifting, and millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha may not enjoy the same privilege of owning their home in retirement. In fact, the average age of the first-time homebuyer crept up to 40 years old. So you add 30 years to 40, we're talking 70 years old by the time you own your house. That is not something that most people are going to actually have going into retirement. Most people are going to retire before age 70. So what's the takeaway from all this? You could have had some lean years in the middle of this 30-year retirement, but it would have lined up pretty naturally with when your retirement spending would have dipped anyway. The other thing worth noting is that if you didn't dip your spending at all and did that flat 18K a year, it's very likely that you would have died before you actually ran out of money. So this 200K retirement, if you combine it with a paid off house, if you combine it with that natural dip in spending, you can actually have a fairly comfortable retirement on 200K or less. It sounds crazy until you actually dive into the numbers, you look at the analysis, and realize that it is entirely possible. So let's get into some key considerations for people who are actually on the verge of retiring or in retirement. You want to stress test your plan. You may not be comfortable with knowing that you'll probably run out of money in 20 years. Most retirees want to see their account balance growing over time. And that means that you either need to sit down with an advisor or you need to analyze your portfolio using professional tools. I recommend a tool called Bolden. I'll leave a link down below for you guys to actually look at this tool, but it lets you analyze everything. Pull in your actual Social Security data, look at all your accounts, all your housing, all your expenses, model Roth conversions, model doing different portfolio mixes, do your Monte Carlo simulation, everything that you need to do in retirement. And it's great software. I recommend it to anybody who's just worried about all the nuts and bolts and different scenarios that they could encounter in retirement. This will give you that peace of mind that you are on the right track. And going into retirement, you want to audit your spending. The difference between a comfortable retirement and a scary retirement is how much you intend to spend. If the amount that you intend to spend in retirement is going to be less than what your projected Social Security benefit is, you have almost nothing to worry about. It's going to be fine, regardless of if you save any money or not, if your projected expenses in retirement are going to be less than what the government's going to give you at your full retirement age. And at these lower retirement balances, I would say less than about $800 to $1 million, you don't really have to worry about Roth conversions. Roth conversions are the buzzword that a lot of financial advisors use to try and draw you into their office so they can show you all these different calculations and all these taxes and requirement minimum distributions that you're going to have to take. And honestly, it's not anything worth worrying about when your account balance is less than about $1 million. The other thing that you don't really have to worry about are those required minimum distributions. Those required minimum distributions out of your pre-tax 401k or your traditional IRA that take effect at age 73. If you have a small account balance like this and you're leaning more heavily on the account to exist in retirement, you're going to be above that required minimum distribution anyway. So it's not something that you necessarily have to worry about in retirement. But the Social Security piece is one that you really have to take some time and think through. What age are you actually going to start drawing Social Security? And if your spouse is also drawing Social Security, what age are they going to draw Social Security? I did an entire YouTube video going through my lifts framework on the optimal age to actually withdraw Social Security. There's not a one size fits all here. There's things that you have to consider to get Social Security timing right for you. Another thing that people really freak out about is long-term care coverage. So when you're at these lower income brackets in retirement, you're actually eligible for Medicaid. And Medicaid can cover the majority of those long-term care costs. So when your costs are spiking at the end of your retirement, you can actually lean on Medicaid to cover those long-term care costs. That is a huge burden off of your portfolio. It's going to give you some peace of mind. And I'll show you here on the screen what the income limits are to draw Medicaid, but that is something that you can lean on very heavily if you don't have a massive nest egg in retirement. If you have a ton of money in retirement, you won't be eligible for Medicaid. And at that point, you would have to line up insurance or figure out how you're going to self-fund long-term care. And that can be extremely expensive. Make sure, regardless of how much money you have, you do your estate planning. You want your will in place. You want all the beneficiaries on your accounts updated. One thing people don't realize is that if your beneficiaries don't match your will, they're going to default to whatever those beneficiary assignments are on those accounts. So you want the beneficiary assignments to match your will. You want your advance directives. So if you have some sort of health issue, your family isn't left trying to figure out what you want to do. It's already spelled out in writing. Any power of attorney, any medical power of attorney, and then considering any charitable giving that you might want to do at the end of your life. Maybe if you don't have kids, or if you have a substantial amount of money more at the end of your retirement than you were expecting, where do you want the money to actually go? And the last thing that a lot of people in retirement don't consider is when one spouse passes away. Both spouses aren't just going to magically kick the bucket at one time. When one spouse passes away, it is going to be a major hit to the retirement plan. So now the Social Security benefit is going to be cut because one of the spouse's Social Security benefit is going to go away. You're going to shift from those married filing jointly tax brackets to the married filing single tax brackets. At this point, more of your Social Security benefit can actually become taxable. That's right. Depending on how much money that you're actually bringing in retirement, they actually start taxing your Social Security, and you get forced into higher tax brackets as a single filer compared to a married couple. The other thing is that you might actually get forced into IRMA surcharges. So based on how much money they will need to withdraw from the accounts and their Social Security benefits, it's possible that you go from not paying any surcharges on your Medicare to actually having to pay surcharges. So I threw a lot of information at you guys, and I'll actually leave a link down below to this full case study. Everything that we've discussed in this video, both back tests showing you that 6% withdrawal rate and that flat $18,000 withdrawal rate. So you can look it over and analyze it for yourself. But if today's video gave you some peace of mind that even if you're starting your retirement savings late, that you can still probably retire comfortably, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, because I'm trying to make you 1% better every day. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.
Understand the market, keep your vision on the prize, building up the wealth right in front of your eyes. Talk Higgins, yeah, we keep it moving. Talk Higgins, watch the wealth improving. Markets and the money, making sense of the math, helping you navigate the financial path. Talk Higgins, subscribe for the vision. Stay smart, stay invested. We out.